the hunger in Eleanor Nash's eyes reflected in the dusty shop window as she twisted the gold band from her finger. Her gaunt face barely recognizable from the plump, cheeked bride who had worn it with such hope just 2 years ago. Inside Cooper's General Store in Silver Creek, Montana Territory, 1878, a loaf of bread sat on the counter like a mirage to a woman who hadn't eaten in 3 days. "Please, Mr. Cooper," Eleanor whispered, sliding the wedding ring across the worn wooden counter. "Just 1 loaf." "This ring is worth 20 times that." Amos Cooper, a stout man with thinning hair and perpetually ink-stained fingers, peered at her over wire-rimmed spectacles. His expression held sympathy, but his eyes remained shrewd as he examined the simple gold band. "Mrs. Nash, I wish I could help, but I've extended all the credit I can. Times are hard for everyone since the mine closed." He pushed the ring back toward her with a weathered finger. "And I wouldn't feel right taking something so personal." "My husband is dead, Mr. Cooper," Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the words that still felt like knives in her throat. "And this ring won't feed me. Please." The small bell above the door jingled, bringing with it a gust of autumn air and the scent of horses and leather. Eleanor didn't turn, too focused on the shopkeeper's face, searching for any sign of relenting. "I said no, Mrs. Nash. I'm sorry about Thomas, truly, but I'll take a loaf of that sourdough, Cooper," came a deep voice from behind her, "and whatever else the lady needs." Eleanor turned slowly, pride warring with desperation. The man standing there was tall, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Dust covered his denim pants and leather vest, marking him as someone just arrived in town. His eyes, clear and blue as a mountain lake, met hers without pity. "I don't accept charity," Eleanor said, even as her stomach clenched painfully. The stranger placed a silver dollar on the counter. "It's not charity if you work for it. My name's Quentin Xavier. Just bought the old Miller place outside town. Could use someone to help get it in order." Mr. Cooper quickly wrapped the bread, adding a small jar of preserves and a wedge of cheese. Eleanor noticed how the shopkeeper suddenly seemed much more accommodating with actual currency on the counter. "Your ring," Quentin said, nodding toward her hand where she still clutched the gold band. Eleanor slipped it back onto her finger, the metal cold against her skin. "Thank you, Mr. Xavier, but just Quentin, and I mean what I said about the work, fair pay for fair labor." He gathered the parcels, tipping his hat to Cooper. "I'll see the lady home safely." Outside, the main street of Silver Creek stretched before them, buildings weathered by harsh Montana winters and brutal summer sun. The mining town had seen better days, with nearly half the businesses boarded up since the silver vein ran dry the previous spring. Eleanor hesitated on the boardwalk. "My cabin's just outside town, Mr. Xavier. There's no need to trouble yourself." "Quentin," he corrected again, offering her the bread. "And it's no trouble. Town's got eyes, Mrs. Nash. A woman alone invites talk." She took the bread, fighting the urge to tear into it immediately. "The town already talks plenty about the widow Nash. Then give them something new to chatter about." His mouth quirked into something not quite a smile. "Besides, I meant what I said about the work." They walked in silence for a while, Eleanor's worn boots kicking up dust alongside Quentin's longer strides. The mountains loomed purple in the distance, the late September sun casting long shadows across the valley. "How long has your husband been gone?" Quentin finally asked as they turned onto the narrow path leading to her small cabin. 6 months. Eleanor swallowed hard. "Mining accident, same one that closed the Silverton mine." Quentin nodded. "I heard about that when I was passing through Helena. 12 men, wasn't it?" 13, Eleanor corrected quietly. "They found Thomas 3 days after the others." Her cabin came into view, a small, weathered structure Thomas had built with his own hands when they'd first arrived from Ohio 3 years ago. The vegetable garden she'd once tended so proudly was now overrun with weeds, the fence sagging in places. "It was a good place once," she said, almost to herself. "Could be again," Quentin replied, He stopped at her gate, not presuming to enter her property. "About that job offer." "I wasn't just saying that for Cooper's benefit." Eleanor turned to face him fully. In the fading light, she could see the lines around his eyes, putting him somewhere in his early 30s, perhaps 5 years older than her 27 years. His face was tanned and weathered, but handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble. "What kind of work?" she asked cautiously. "The house needs a thorough cleaning, been empty for years, and I can't cook worth a damn." He shrugged. "I'd pay fair wages, and you'd be home before dark each day." Eleanor considered his offer, weighing her dwindling options. The small amount of savings Thomas had left was gone. She'd sold most of their possessions of value. Winter would arrive soon, and without money for coal and supplies. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Quentin nodded, setting the parcels of food on her gate post. "I'll be back tomorrow morning. You can let me know then." As he turned to leave, Eleanor called after him, "Why did you help me, Mr. Xavier?" He paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. "My mother once had to sell her wedding ring to feed me and my sisters after my father died. No one helped her." His eyes held hers. "Get some rest, Mrs. Nash. You look like you need it." Eleanor watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the sunset. Only when he disappeared around the bend did she gather the food and hurry inside, where she finally allowed herself to break off a piece of bread and eat it slowly, savoring each bite. That night, she slept better than she had in months. Morning brought clear skies and a chill that promised winter wasn't far off. Eleanor rose early, washing in the cold water from her pump and putting on her cleanest dress, a faded blue cotton that had once fit her curves, but now hung loosely on her frame. She brushed her chestnut hair until it shone, twisting it into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. True to his word, Quentin arrived as the sun cleared the eastern hills. He sat easily atop a sturdy bay gelding, leading a smaller paint mare behind him. "Thought you might need transportation," he said by way of greeting. "The Miller place is 3 miles west." Eleanor hesitated in her doorway. "I haven't said I'd take the job." "But you will," he replied with quiet confidence, "because you're not the type to starve when there's honest work to be had." She couldn't argue with his assessment. "I need to know what you expect, Mr. Xavier, specifically." His expression remained neutral. "Cleaning, cooking, helping me get the place in order. Nothing improper. You'll have your own space and be free to leave whenever you wish." Eleanor studied him, searching for any hint of deception or improper intent. All she saw was straightforward practicality. "Very well," she agreed finally. "But I keep my own hours and return home each night." "Fair enough." He dismounted in one fluid motion, holding the paint's reins out to her. "Can you ride?" "I grew up in Ohio, not Mars," she replied dryly, taking the reins. "I can ride." Something like amusement flickered in his eyes. "Good to know, Mrs. Nash." The Miller Ranch was larger than Eleanor had expected. The main house was a sprawling single-story structure with a wide porch and multiple additions that spoke of decades of family growth. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, a bunkhouse, and what appeared to be a workshop. The corrals were empty save for a few chickens pecking at the dirt, but the pastures beyond looked rich with grass. "Frank Miller died last winter," Quentin explained as they dismounted in the yard. "His children all moved away years ago. Place has been sitting empty since." "It's a lot for one man," Eleanor observed, surveying the property. "I've got plans." He led the horses to a water trough. "Come on inside. You can see what you're dealing with." The interior of the house told the story of hasty departure and months of neglect. Dust covered every surface, cobwebs stretched in corners, and the air smelled stale and musty. But beneath the neglect, Eleanor could see the bones of a well-built, comfortable home. "I'll need supplies," she said, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done. "Soap, brushes, rags. Write a list. I'll have whatever you need delivered from town." Quentin watched her as she moved through the main room, running a finger along a dusty shelf. "You think you can manage it?" Eleanor straightened her shoulders. I managed a household in far worse conditions when we first came west. This is just dirt and neglect, nothing more. For the first time, she saw a genuine smile cross his face. I thought you might say that. They agreed on terms $1 a day plus meals, with Sundays off and Eleanor set to work immediately. Quentin left her to tackle the kitchen while he went to the barn to attend to his own tasks. By midday, Eleanor had made significant progress on the kitchen. She had scrubbed the large cast iron stove until it gleamed, swept decades of dust from corners, and washed the windows until sunlight streamed in unimpeded. She was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the wooden floor, when Quentin returned. "You've accomplished more in a morning than I could have in a week," he remarked, looking impressed. Eleanor sat back on her heels, pushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "It's coming along. Though that pantry will need to be completely emptied and checked for mice before we can store food." "Mice don't worry me," he said, setting a canteen on the newly cleaned table. "Drink something. You've been working for hours." Eleanor accepted the water gratefully, suddenly aware of her parched throat. "What brought you to Silver Creek, Mr. Xavier? Not many people coming here since the mine closed." Quentin leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "Land's cheap, and I've had my fill of crowded places." "Where were you before this?" "Here and there. Drove cattle up from Texas a few times, worked some claims in Colorado, tried my hand at lumber in Oregon." His eyes met hers. "What brought you and your husband here?" "The same thing that brings most people west. Dreams of a better life." Eleanor recapped the canteen. "Thomas heard about the silver strike and thought we'd make our fortune, and instead I'm scrubbing another man's floor for $1 a day." She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "Life has a way of not working out as planned." "That it does," Quentin agreed quietly. "I've got to ride into town for those supplies. Will you be all right here alone?" Eleanor gestured around the kitchen. "I have plenty to keep me occupied." He nodded, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded bandnote. "Your pay for today." "I know we agreed on the end of the week, but..." She hesitated before taking it. "Thank you." After he left, Eleanor continued her assault on years of grime, working her way through the main living area. As she cleaned, she found herself wondering about Quentin Xavier. He was clearly educated, his speech betraying more refinement than the average cowhand. And there was something in his manner, a watchfulness, a careful precision to his movements that spoke of a man accustomed to danger. By late afternoon, when Quentin returned with supplies, Eleanor had cleaned most of the main living spaces. Her back ached and her hands were red and chapped, but satisfaction filled her at the visible progress. "I've got to get home before dark," she told him, washing her hands in the basin. "But I'll return in the morning to start on the bedrooms." "I'll ride with you," he said, unloading packages onto the newly cleaned table. "That's not necessary. I know the way now." Quentin's expression was unyielding. "It's getting late, and there have been reports of wolves in the area." "I'll see you home safely." The ride back to her cabin was quiet, both of them tired from the day's labor. As they approached her property, Eleanor noticed something wasn't right. The door to her cabin stood ajar, swinging slightly in the evening breeze. "Stay here," Quentin said, his voice suddenly hard. He dismounted smoothly, drawing a revolver from beneath his coat. "No, it's my home," Eleanor protested, sliding from the paint's back. Quentin glanced at her, then nodded once. "Stay behind me." They approached the cabin cautiously. Quentin pushed the door open wider with the barrel of his gun, then stepped inside. Eleanor followed, her heart pounding. The small cabin had been ransacked. Her few remaining possessions were scattered across the floor, the mattress slashed open, the single chair overturned. Who would do this? Eleanor whispered, surveying the destruction. "I have nothing of value left." Quentin holstered his weapon, moving to check the single rear window. "Probably drifters. Lot of desperate people passing through since the mine closed." Eleanor knelt to pick up a broken picture frame. Inside was a photograph of her and Thomas on their wedding day, now creased down the middle. She traced her finger over Thomas's smiling face, a lump forming in her throat. "They didn't take this, at least," she murmured. Quentin watched her for a moment, then began righting the furniture. "It'll take a while to set this right. You shouldn't stay here tonight." "I have nowhere else to go," Eleanor said, carefully placing the photograph on the small table. "There's plenty of room at the ranch. You can have one of the bedrooms you haven't cleaned yet." When she hesitated, he added, "I'll sleep in the bunkhouse if it makes you more comfortable." Eleanor looked around at her violated home, considering her options. The cabin suddenly felt unsafe, exposed, and the thought of trying to sleep among the destruction was unbearable. "Just for tonight," she agreed finally. "Until I can set things right here." They gathered what remained of her clothes and personal items, including Thomas's old shotgun that had somehow escaped the intruder's notice, hidden as it was beneath the floorboards under the bed. Before they left, Eleanor carefully locked the door, though it seemed a pointless gesture now. Back at the ranch, Quentin helped her settle into one of the smaller bedrooms, bringing her fresh linens and water for washing. "I'll heat something for supper," he said, pausing at the door. "You should rest." Alone in the quiet room, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back to fall. She wept not just for the invasion of her home, but for everything she'd lost: Thomas, their dreams, the life they'd planned together. When the tears finally subsided, she felt hollow but somehow lighter, as if she'd released a burden she'd been carrying too long. She washed her face and changed into her nightgown, covering it with her shawl before venturing out to the kitchen. Quentin had managed to heat a simple meal of beans and bacon, along with some of the bread she'd helped him purchase the day before. They ate in companionable silence until Quentin finally spoke. "I was thinking about your situation." Eleanor tensed slightly. "What about it?" "That cabin isn't safe for you, especially with winter coming on. There's plenty of room here and I could use the help full time." He met her gaze steadily. "You could stay here. Proper arrangements, of course. You'd have your privacy and better pay." "People would talk," Eleanor said, though the idea of not returning to her violated cabin held undeniable appeal. "People always talk," Quentin replied with a shrug. "Question is whether you care more about their opinions than your own welfare." Eleanor studied him across the table. "Why are you being so kind to me, Mr. Xavier? You don't know me." "I know enough." He set down his fork. "I know you're proud but practical, hard-working, resilient." His eyes held hers. "And I know what it's like to be alone in the world." There was something in his voice that resonated with Eleanor's own loss. She recognized the shadow behind his eyes, the same one she saw in her mirror each morning. "I'll consider your offer," she said finally, "but I need to think on it." He nodded, respecting her need for space. "Take all the time you need." That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Eleanor found herself thinking not of Thomas or her ransacked cabin, but of Quentin Xavier and the quiet strength he exuded. There was something both comforting and unsettling about his presence, comforting in its solidity, unsettling in the way it made her aware of herself as a woman, something she hadn't felt since Thomas died. Sleep came eventually, dreamless and deep. The next morning, Eleanor woke to the smell of coffee. She dressed quickly and found Quentin in the kitchen, frying bacon in the newly cleaned cast iron skillet. "Hope I didn't wake you," he said, glancing up as she entered. "No, I'm usually up with the sun." Eleanor moved to the stove, gently nudging him aside. "Let me do that before you burn it." He relinquished the spatula without argument. "I was planning to ride back to your cabin this morning, see if there are any tracks or signs of who broke in." Eleanor nodded, turning the bacon with practiced ease. "I should come with you. There may be things I can salvage." They set out after breakfast, the morning air crisp with the promise of frost in the coming weeks. At the cabin, Quentin circled the building slowly, examining the ground while Eleanor went inside to assess the damage in daylight. It wasn't as bad as it had seemed the night before. Most of her clothing was intact, if scattered, and the furniture could be repaired. The worst loss was her small store of preserved food, which had been either taken or destroyed. "Whoever did this was looking for valuables," Quentin said from the doorway. "I found tracks heading east toward the old mining camp, probably drifters passing through." Eleanor nodded, folding a quilt that had belonged to her mother. "Most of what they took can be replaced, except for time." "What do you mean, winter's coming?" She gestured toward the window, where the mountains already wore caps of white. "I needed those preserves to get through until spring." Quentin was quiet for a moment. "My offer stands. The ranch has plenty of storage, and we could bring your things there. You'd be safer, and we could pool our resources for winter." Eleanor considered his words. The cabin held memories of Thomas, but it also held loneliness and now violation. The thought of spending the winter alone there, jumping at every sound in the night, was daunting. "If I accept," she said slowly, "I want to be clear about the arrangement. I would be your housekeeper, nothing more." "Of course," he agreed immediately. "You'd have your own room, your privacy, and fair wages. I'm offering employment and safer lodging, Mrs. Nash, not anything improper." Eleanor looked around the small cabin one last time, her gaze lingering on the photograph of her and Thomas. "Then I accept, Mr. Xavier, at least until spring." They spent the day moving Eleanor's remaining possessions to the ranch. There wasn't much her clothing, some kitchenware, a few books, and personal mementos. The larger furniture they left behind, Quentin promising to bring his wagon another day to collect it. By evening, Eleanor was installed in what would be her room, permanently a pleasant space at the back of the house, with its own small stove for heat, and a window overlooking the eastern pastures. Quentin had insisted she take this room rather than the smaller one she'd occupied the previous night, saying it would give her more privacy and comfort. "This is the first time I've slept anywhere besides that cabin since we came west," Eleanor remarked, as they sat down to supper, a proper meal she'd prepared from the supplies Quentin had purchased. "How long were you married?" Quentin asked, serving himself from the pot of stew she'd made. 5 years. Eleanor smiled faintly at the memory. "We were childhood sweethearts back in Ohio, married right after I turned 22. "He was a lucky man," Quentin said quietly. Eleanor looked up, surprised by the compliment. "What about you? Have you ever been married?" A shadow crossed his face. "No, never found the right time or place for it, I guess." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Eleanor didn't press. Everyone had parts of themselves they kept private, especially out west where many came to escape their pasts. The next 2 weeks established a comfortable routine. Eleanor tackled the house room by room, gradually transforming it from a neglected shell into a clean, orderly home. Quentin worked from dawn to dusk on the outbuildings and fences, preparing the property for winter and the livestock he planned to acquire. They took their meals together, sharing the work of the ranch and gradually learning each other's habits and preferences. Eleanor discovered that Quentin was an early riser who preferred coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. He learned that she hummed softly while working old hymns her mother had taught her, and that she had a weakness for the wild berries that still clung to bushes along the creek. One evening, as October gave way to November and the first serious frost silvered the grass, Quentin returned from town with more than just supplies. A large crate sat in the back of his wagon, carefully covered with a tarp. "What's that?" Eleanor asked, wiping her hands on her apron as she came out to help unload. Quentin's expression was unusually hesitant. "Something for the house. A surprise, really." He carried the crate inside with careful movements and set it in the main room. Eleanor watched curiously as he pried the lid open and removed layers of straw packing. Inside was a gramophone, its brass horn gleaming in the lamplight. "Mr. Xavier," Eleanor breathed, touching the polished wood base. "This must have cost a fortune." "Quentin," he corrected automatically. "And it's not just for show." He reached back into the crate and withdrew several wax cylinders. "Thought the house could use some music." Eleanor was speechless. It was an extravagant gift for a ranch house, the kind of luxury few homes in Silver Creek could boast. Do you know how to operate it? She asked finally. The shopkeeper gave me a demonstration. Quentin set about arranging the machine on a side table, fitting one of the cylinders into place. Let's see if I remember correctly. After some adjustments, the gramophone crackled to life, filling the room with the strains of a waltz. The sound quality was tinny and distant, but the music itself seemed to transform the space, making it truly feel like a home for the first time. Quentin turned to her, something vulnerable in his expression. Do you like it? It's wonderful, Eleanor said honestly, but I don't understand. Why? He looked away, adjusting the volume. Winter's long out here, thought it might make the evenings pass more pleasantly. After a pause, he added, My mother loved music, said a house without it wasn't really a home. Eleanor studied his profile, seeing something new in his features, a softness beneath the weathered exterior. On impulse, she stepped closer and placed her hand lightly on his arm. Thank you, she said simply. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, something electric passed between them. Then he cleared his throat and stepped back. I should get the rest of the supplies before dark, he said, his voice a touch gruffer than usual. As November deepened, the ranch transformed further. Quentin purchased a small herd of cattle from a rancher further south, who was looking to reduce his stock before winter. He hired 2 hands to help manage them, brothers named Joseph and Samuel Parker, who took up residence in the bunkhouse and took their meals in the main house. The presence of the Parker brothers changed the dynamic, giving the isolated ranch the feeling of a proper working establishment. They were good-natured young men in their 20s, respectful of Eleanor and hard-working. Their arrival also placed Eleanor more firmly in the role of housekeeper, rather than just a woman living alone with Quentin, which eased some of her concerns about propriety. One Saturday, in mid-November, Quentin announced that he needed to ride into town for mail and supplies. Would you like to come along? Must be tiring being stuck out here all the time. Eleanor hesitated. She hadn't been to town since the day he'd bought her bread, and the thought of facing the gossip that had surely flourished about her living situation was daunting. People will talk, she said. Let them, Quentin shrugged. You need things for yourself, don't you? And it would do you good to get off the property for a few hours. He was right, she realized. She did need personal items, and hiding away wouldn't stop gossip anyway. All right, give me a moment to change. Silver Creek was busier than she expected for a late autumn day. A freight wagon had arrived from Helena, bringing supplies and mail, and the townspeople had gathered to receive both. As Quentin helped Eleanor down from the wagon in front of Cooper's store, she felt eyes turning toward them. Mrs. Nash, Amos Cooper greeted her as they entered the store, his tone carefully neutral. Haven't seen you in some time. I've been working at the Xavier Ranch, she replied evenly. As housekeeper, Cooper's eyes flicked between her and Quentin. I see. Well, what can I get for you today? As they gathered supplies, Eleanor was acutely aware of the whispers and glances. When Quentin moved to the far side of the store to examine tools, Martha Wilkins, the minister's wife, approached Eleanor. Eleanor, dear, she said in a low voice, I've been meaning to call on you. We've been concerned about your situation. Eleanor straightened her shoulders. My situation is that of a widow who has found respectable employment, Mrs. Wilkins. Martha's lips pursed. Living under the same roof as a single man is hardly respectable, dear, whatever you call it. Mr. Xavier has been nothing but a gentleman, Eleanor replied, her cheeks warming despite her resolve to remain dignified. And I'm not the only employee. The Parker brothers work there as well. All the same, Mrs. Wilkins, came Quentin's voice from behind them. I hope you're not suggesting anything improper about Mrs. Nash's character. She's brought order and respectability to my household, and I won't hear a word against her. Martha flushed, momentarily flustered by his direct approach. Of course not, Mr. Xavier. I was merely expressing concern, as any Christian woman would. Your concern is noted, he said coolly. Eleanor, I've got everything on our list. Shall we pay and be on our way? Outside, Eleanor released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was uncomfortable. Small towns, Quentin said with a grimace. Everyone thinks they have the right to know everyone else's business. It's not just curiosity, Eleanor said as they loaded their purchases. They truly believe they're upholding morality by monitoring everyone's behavior. Seems to me true morality would involve more charity and less judgment. He secured the last crate. Speaking of which, I have one more stop to make before we head back. He led her to a small building at the end of the main street, the office of Henry Williams, Silver Creek's only lawyer and notary. Before Eleanor could ask why they were there, Quentin ushered her inside. Mr. Xavier, Williams greeted them, rising from behind a cluttered desk. And Mrs. Nash. Please sit down. Did you draw up the papers I asked about? Quentin asked, remaining standing while Eleanor took one of the offered chairs. Yes, everything's ready. Williams shuffled through some documents, though I still think it's an unusual arrangement. What arrangement? Eleanor asked. Looking between the two men, Quentin met her gaze. I've had Mr. Williams draw up a contract of employment and residency. It formally establishes your position as housekeeper of the Xavier Ranch with specified wages, accommodations, and duties. He paused. It also includes a clause that grants you the right to remain in residence through next spring, regardless of whether your employment continues. Eleanor blinked in surprise. You're giving me a legal right to stay. I thought it might ease your mind and silence some of the gossip. He nodded toward the papers. Everything's laid out clearly. You're welcome to read it thoroughly before signing. Eleanor took the document, scanning the careful legal language. It was exactly as Quentin had described, a formal arrangement that protected her position and provided security she hadn't had since Thomas died. Why would you do this? She asked quietly. Because your peace of mind matters to me, he replied simply. And because I want you to stay of your own free choice, not out of necessity. Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat at the unexpected kindness. Thank you, she managed. She signed the papers, as did Quentin, with Williams witnessing their signatures. As they left the office, Eleanor felt lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. We should celebrate, Quentin said as they climbed onto the wagon. How about dinner at the hotel restaurant? I hear they do a decent steak. After what just happened with Mrs. Wilkins. Eleanor laughed. That would certainly give them something to talk about. Let them talk. His smile was warm. I'm hungry, you're hungry, and I'm tired of my own cooking on your day off. The Silver Creek Hotel restaurant was the closest thing the town had to fine dining. Though modest by Eastern standards, its white tablecloths and proper china made it the location for special occasions in the small mining town. They attracted curious glances as they were seated, but Eleanor found she cared less than she expected. Quentin's formal contract had given her a sense of legitimacy that made the stares easier to bear. This is the first time I've eaten in a restaurant since we came west, she admitted, as they studied the small menu. Then we should make it memorable, Quentin replied, ordering a bottle of wine to accompany their meal. As they ate, their conversation flowed more easily than ever before, moving beyond the practicalities of the ranch to personal histories and observations. Eleanor found herself laughing at Quentin's dry humor and thoughtful insights. In turn, he listened attentively when she spoke of her childhood in Ohio and her early days with Thomas. He sounds like he was a good man, Quentin said when she described how Thomas had built their cabin with his own hands. He was, Eleanor agreed, a familiar ache in her chest, though softer now than it had been. He had big dreams. That's what brought us west, his certainty that we could build something better than what we had in Ohio. And what were your dreams? Quentin asked, refilling her wine glass. The question caught her off guard. I suppose I adopted his. A home, children, eventually prosperity. She traced the rim of her glass. I never thought much beyond that. And now, Eleanor considered the question seriously. Now I think about making it through winter, about finding some measure of security. She met his gaze. About building something lasting, even if it's different from what I once imagined. Quentin nodded slowly. That's what brought me to Silver Creek, the chance to build something of my own, away from cities and crowds. You've never told me what you did before you came here, Eleanor observed. A shadow crossed his face. I've had many occupations, not all of them worth discussing over dinner. Before she could press further, a man approached their table, swaying slightly with drink. It took Eleanor a moment to recognize Jacob Mercer, who had worked alongside Thomas in the mine. Well, if it isn't the widow Nash, Mercer slurred, bracing himself against their table. Didn't take you long to find comfort, did it? Quentin's expression hardened instantly. You're interrupting our meal, friend. I suggest you move along. Mercer ignored him, his bleary eyes fixed on Eleanor. Thomas always said you were too pretty for him. Guess he was right. Barely cold in the ground and you're already. He never finished the sentence. Quentin was on his feet in one fluid motion, his hand closing around Mercer's collar. Apologize to the lady, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Quentin, don't, Eleanor said, alarmed by the sudden tension. He's drunk, he doesn't know what he's saying. Oh, I know exactly what I'm saying, Mercer sneered. Everyone in town knows you've moved in with this stranger. Thomas would be ashamed. Quentin's grip tightened. Last chance to apologize before I drag you outside. The restaurant had gone silent, all eyes on their table. The proprietor hurried over, wringing his hands. Please, gentlemen, not in my establishment. Mercer seemed to suddenly register the cold fury in Quentin's eyes and the iron grip on his collar. Some of the drunken bravado left his face. No need for trouble, he muttered. Didn't mean nothing by it. Apologize to Mrs. Nash, Quentin repeated, not releasing him. Sorry, Eleanor, Mercer mumbled, not meeting her eyes. Was out of line. Quentin let him go with a small push, and Mercer stumbled back, then quickly made his way to the door. The restaurant gradually returned to its normal hum of conversation, though Eleanor could feel curious eyes still watching them. I'm sorry about that, Quentin said, as he sat back down, his voice still tight with anger. It's not your fault, Eleanor replied, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. But perhaps we should go. Quentin nodded, signaling for the bill. As he paid, Eleanor noticed how the other diners averted their eyes, pretending not to watch while seeing everything. Outside, the night had turned cold, stars sharp against the black sky. They walked to the wagon in silence, both lost in thought. I shouldn't have brought you here, Quentin said finally as he helped her onto the seat. It was selfish of me. No, Eleanor countered. I'm glad we came. I can't hide away forever, letting fear of gossip control my life. She looked at him in the dim light from the hotel windows. Thank you for defending me. Always, he said simply, and the word hung between them, weighted with promise. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but companionable. When they arrived, Quentin lit the lamps and built up the fire while Eleanor made tea. They sat in the main room, listening to one of the gramophone cylinders, a soft, melancholy tune that seemed to fit their reflective mood. May I ask you something personal? Eleanor ventured after a while. Quentin nodded, his face half shadowed in the lamplight. Earlier, when I asked about your past, you seemed reluctant to speak of it. Why is that? He was silent for so long that Eleanor thought he might not answer. Then he sighed, setting down his teacup. I was a lawman for many years, he said finally. Marshal in Wyoming Territory, then worked for Pinkertons for a time. Eleanor waited, sensing there was more. I've seen things, done things that don't sit easy with me now. His eyes met hers, honest and direct. I've killed men, Eleanor. In the line of duty, always, but that doesn't make it simpler to live with. She absorbed this information, studying his face. She could see it now, the watchfulness, the careful way he positioned himself in any room, the practiced ease with which he'd drawn his weapon at her cabin. Is that why you came here? To leave that life behind? Partly, he acknowledged. But also because I was tired of not building anything lasting. When you enforce the law, you're always dealing with what's broken. I wanted to create something for once. Eleanor nodded, understanding. And does anyone from that life know where you are now? No. His expression was certain. That chapter is closed. I made sure of it. Something in his tone made Eleanor wonder what exactly he'd done to ensure his past stayed behind him, but she didn't ask. Everyone deserved the chance to start anew, wasn't that the promise of the West? Thank you for telling me, she said instead. You deserve to know who you're living with, he replied. Then, with the hint of a smile, after all, it's in the contract now. The weeks leading up to Christmas brought heavy snowfall that transformed the landscape into a pristine white expanse. The ranch became a world unto itself, cut off from town except for occasional trips when the weather allowed. Eleanor found she didn't mind the isolation. The main house was warm and comfortable, the work satisfying, and the company, she had to admit, increasingly enjoyable. Quentin proved to be a thoughtful employer and a considerate housemate. He respected her privacy, valued her opinion on matters relating to the ranch, and never treated her as a servant despite her official role as housekeeper. The Parker brothers, too, were pleasant additions to the household, bringing youthful energy and good humor to the dinner table each evening. One afternoon, a week before Christmas, Eleanor was preparing dinner when Quentin entered the kitchen, stamping snow from his boots. "Weather's turning again," he announced. "Joseph and Samuel have gone to check the north pasture fence. Probably won't be back until morning." Eleanor looked up from the dough she was kneading. "Should you have gone with them? Sounds dangerous to be out with another storm coming." "They know what they're doing." Quentin moved to the stove, pouring himself coffee, and I needed to finish the repairs on the barn roof. She nodded, returning to her bread making. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, Eleanor shaping the dough while Quentin sat at the table, reviewing figures in a ledger. "I've been thinking about Christmas," he said suddenly. "We should do something special." "For the boys and for ourselves." Eleanor smiled at his enthusiasm. "What did you have in mind? A proper dinner, maybe decorations." He looked almost boyish in his eagerness. "I saw some families in town cutting pine boughs for their homes. We could do that," Eleanor agreed. "And I could bake cookies. My mother's recipe for gingerbread was famous back in Ohio." They spent the next hour planning their Christmas celebration, the domestic conversation feeling surprisingly natural. As they talked, Eleanor realized how comfortable she had become in Quentin's presence, how easily they had developed rhythms and patterns together, like a long married couple. The thought should have troubled her, she knew. Thomas had been gone less than a year, and here she was, building a new life with another man. Yet the guilt she expected to feel was muted, overshadowed by a growing warmth whenever Quentin was near. That evening, after dinner, the wind picked up, howling around the eaves of the house and driving snow against the windows. Eleanor sat in the main room, mending one of Quentin's shirts by lamplight while he read from a worn copy of Dickens. "Listen to this," he said, looking up from the page. "It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things, that while there is infection in disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor." Eleanor smiled. "That's lovely. Made me think of you," he said quietly. She looked up, surprised. "Me? You've brought laughter back to this house, to me." His eyes held hers, serious and sincere. "I don't think I knew how much I needed that until you came." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I think we've helped each other," she said carefully. "This arrangement has been good for both of us." "Is that all it is to you?" Quentin asked, setting the book aside. An arrangement? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implication. Eleanor set down her mending, her heart suddenly racing. "I don't know what you mean," she said, though she did. Quentin leaned forward, his gaze steady. "I think you do, Eleanor. There's something growing between us, something more than employer and housekeeper." She couldn't deny it, though part of her wanted to. Over the past weeks, her feelings for Quentin had deepened beyond gratitude or simple friendship. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, noticing the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled, feeling a flutter in her stomach when their hands accidentally touched. "It's too soon," she whispered. "Thomas would want you to be happy," Quentin finished gently. "I'm not asking for declarations or promises, Eleanor, just acknowledgement that what's between us is real." Before she could respond, a tremendous gust of wind rattled the windows, and the lamp flickered ominously. Then, with a final sputter, it went out, plunging the room into darkness save for the glow from the fireplace. "Oil must be low," Quentin's voice came from the darkness. "Stay where you are." "I'll get the spare lamp from the kitchen." Eleanor heard him move across the room, followed by a crash and a muttered curse as he apparently collided with something. "Are you all right?" she called, rising to her feet. "Fine," he replied, his voice closer now. "Just found the edge of the table with my hip." She laughed despite herself, the tension of the moment broken. "Hold on, I'll help. I know where the lamps are kept." They navigated by firelight to the kitchen, where Eleanor located a lantern and matches. As she struck a match, the brief flare illuminated Quentin's face just inches from her own. For a moment, they stood frozen, so close she could feel the warmth of his breath. "Eleanor," he murmured, his voice husky. The match burned down to her fingers, and she dropped it with a small gasp. Darkness enveloped them again, but she could still sense him near his presence, his warmth. Then his hand found hers in the dark, fingers intertwining with gentle pressure. It was a simple touch, yet it sent a current through her that was anything but simple. Without thinking, Eleanor leaned forward until her forehead rested against his chest. She felt his other hand come up to cradle the back of her head, strong and protective. They stood like that for a long moment, connected yet still holding back, poised on the edge of something profound. Then the wind howled again, rattling the windows, and the spell was broken. Eleanor stepped back, struck another match, and lit the lantern. In its golden glow, she could see Quentin watching her, his expression a mixture of longing and restraint. "We should get back to the fire," she said softly. "It's getting colder." He nodded, taking the lantern from her. As they returned to the main room, Eleanor knew something fundamental had shifted between them. Whatever happened next, there was no going back to the simple employer-employee relationship they had pretended to maintain. The storm raged through the night and into the next day, burying the ranch under fresh drifts of snow. The Parker brothers didn't return, presumably having taken shelter in the line cabin near the north pasture. Confined to the house, Eleanor and Quentin moved around each other with a new awareness, the unfinished conversation from the previous evening hanging between them. By afternoon, the storm had abated enough that Quentin announced he needed to check the barn and livestock. Eleanor watched from the kitchen window as he trudged through knee-deep snow, his figure soon obscured by the continuing flurries. Alone in the house, she tried to focus on her work kneading dough for the evening bread, preparing stew for dinner, but her thoughts kept returning to Quentin and the feelings stirring within her. Was it disloyal to Thomas to care for another man? Or was it possible to honor his memory while still moving forward with her life? She was so absorbed in these thoughts that she didn't hear Quentin return until he spoke from the doorway. "Livestock are fine, but the barn roof has a leak that needs fixing when the weather clears." He stamped snow from his boots. Still no sign of the boys. Eleanor nodded, wiping flour from her hands. "They're experienced. I'm sure they're safe in the line cabin." "Probably playing cards and eating all the supplies we stocked there," Quentin agreed with a smile. He hesitated, then added, "Eleanor, about last night. I've been thinking about that," she interrupted, gathering her courage. "About what you said." He waited, giving her space to continue. "I care for you, Quentin," she said finally, the words both frightening and freeing. "More than I expected to care for anyone after Thomas, but I'm afraid of what that means. For me, for us, for his memory." Quentin crossed the kitchen slowly until he stood before her. "Loving someone new doesn't diminish what you had with him," he said gently. "The heart isn't designed that way." "How can you be sure?" she whispered. "Because I've seen it." My father died when I was young, and years later my mother found love again with a good man. His eyes held hers. It didn't change how she felt about my father, it just meant her heart had room for more love. Eleanor considered his words, finding comfort in the simple wisdom. I'm still not sure what this is between us, she admitted, or what it could become. Then let's find out, he suggested, taking her flour-dusted hands in his. Slowly, with care for your grief and our circumstances. No demands or expectations. It was a generous offer, and one that eased some of her anxiety. I'd like that, she said softly. Quentin's smile was warm and genuine. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. It was a chaste gesture, yet intimate in a way that made Eleanor's heart race. Now, he said, stepping back, how can I help with dinner? Christmas arrived with clear skies and brilliant sunshine that turned the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling white expanse. The Parker brothers had returned safely, bringing with them a young pine tree they'd cut on their way back to the ranch. Thought the house could use some Christmas spirit, Joseph explained as they set it up in the main room. Together, the four of them decorated the tree with paper ornaments Eleanor had crafted, strings of dried berries, and small candles that would be lit only briefly on Christmas Eve for safety's sake. The result was humble but charming, bringing a festive atmosphere to the home. On Christmas morning, Eleanor rose early to prepare a special breakfast. To her surprise, she found presents wrapped in brown paper beneath the tree, one for each of them, including her. When did you manage this? She asked Quentin when he appeared in the doorway, watching her examine the packages with wonder. I have my ways, he replied mysteriously. The boys helped. The Parker brothers soon joined them, and they exchanged gifts over coffee and Eleanor's cinnamon rolls. Samuel and Joseph had carved wooden figurines for everyone, a horse for Quentin and a small bird for Eleanor. It's a wren, Samuel explained. They're small but tough, reminded me of you. Eleanor thanked him warmly, touched by the thoughtfulness. Then it was time for Quentin's gifts. He'd given the Parker brothers new gloves and scarves, practical items they received with genuine appreciation. When Eleanor's turn came, she unwrapped her package with curiosity. Inside was a small leather-bound book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. I noticed you like to read in the evenings, Quentin said, as she turned the volume in her hands. The bookseller in Eleanor recommended this when I was there last month. Eleanor was speechless. It was a perfectly chosen gift, personal yet appropriate, thoughtful rather than extravagant. It's beautiful, she managed finally. Thank you. Her gift to Quentin was modest in comparison, a hand-knitted scarf she'd worked on in secret during the evenings. Yet his pleasure seemed genuine as he wrapped it around his neck immediately. Best Christmas I can remember, he declared, looking around at the small gathering with satisfaction. Eleanor had to agree. Despite the absence of family and the unconventional nature of their household, there was a warmth and connection in the room that embodied the true spirit of the holiday. Later, after a magnificent Christmas dinner featuring a roast goose Quentin had acquired through a trade with a neighboring rancher, the Parker brothers retired to the bunkhouse, leaving Eleanor and Quentin alone by the fire. I have something else for you, Quentin said, reaching into his pocket. Something I wanted to give you privately. He handed her a small package wrapped in silk. Eleanor untied it carefully, gasping when she saw what lay inside, a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. Quentin, this is too much, she protested. Open it, he urged softly. With trembling fingers, Eleanor unlatched the tiny clasp. Inside was a small, carefully cut section of the photograph from her cabin, Thomas's smiling face looking back at her. How did you? She whispered, tears filling her eyes. I took it to a photographer in Helena who specializes in miniatures. Quentin's voice was gentle. I thought you might like to keep him close to your heart, while still making room to move forward. The thoughtfulness of the gesture overwhelmed her. That he had understood her struggle so completely, honoring Thomas's memory while encouraging her to embrace the future, touched her deeply. "I don't know what to say," she managed through tears. "You don't have to say anything." Quentin took the locket and moved behind her to fasten it around her neck. His fingers were gentle against her skin. "I just wanted you to know that I understand what you've lost, and I would never ask you to forget it." Eleanor turned to face him, the locket warm against her chest. Without hesitation, she reached up and touched his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, and then, rising on tiptoe, she pressed her lips to his. The kiss was brief but tender, a promise rather than a demand. When she pulled back, Quentin's eyes were bright with emotion. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Quentin," she replied, and for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt truly, unreservedly happy. Winter settled into a rhythm of snowy days and long, cold nights. The ranch operated at a slower pace, with focus on maintenance and care of the livestock rather than expansion. Eleanor found herself settling into life there with increasing comfort, her relationship with Quentin growing naturally day by day. They were careful and respectful, never overstepping boundaries that might compromise her reputation or push her beyond what she was ready for. Their courtship, if that's what it was, consisted of shared meals, conversations by the fire, occasional touches, and rare, precious kisses. In late January, during a rare break in the winter weather, Quentin announced he needed to ride into town for mail and supplies. Eleanor decided to accompany him, knowing she needed to face the town's gossip eventually. Silver Creek was quiet, many of its residents having departed after the mine's closure. Those who remained greeted them with curious glances, but less overt hostility than Eleanor had feared. Perhaps the 3 months of her living at the ranch without scandal had dulled the edge of their judgment, or perhaps they simply had more pressing concerns in the harsh winter months. At the post office, Quentin collected several letters, one of which he opened immediately, his expression growing serious as he read. "Everything all right?" Eleanor asked as they walked back to the wagon. "Yes," he said, though his tone lacked conviction, "just business matters." She didn't press, respecting his privacy, but noticed his distraction as they completed their errands and began the journey home. That evening, after the Parker brothers had gone to the bunkhouse and she and Quentin were alone by the fire, he finally spoke of what was troubling him. "The letter was from a former colleague at Pinkerton's," he explained, turning the paper in his hands. "There's a matter they think I might help with, a fugitive they believe is in Montana territory." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter night. "They want you to go back to that work?" "Just temporarily," Quentin clarified. "A consultation, really. The man they're looking for is someone I tracked once before. They think I might know where he would hide." "Would you have to leave?" The thought of him gone, perhaps in danger, made her stomach knot with anxiety. "For a few weeks, yes. To Helena, possibly further." He met her eyes. "I haven't decided if I'll go." Eleanor studied his face, seeing the conflict there. "But you're considering it." "It's complicated," he admitted. "I left that life for good reasons. But this man, he's dangerous, Eleanor. He's hurt people, women and children, if I can help bring him to justice." She understood then his sense of responsibility, his need to protect others even at risk to himself. It was part of what made him the man he was, the man she was coming to love. "When would you need to leave?" she asked. "The train to Helena leaves in 3 days." He reached for her hand. "If I go, the boys will stay here to look after things, and you—" Eleanor squeezed his hand. "I think you should go," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "You wouldn't be able to rest easy knowing you could have helped and chose not to." Relief and gratitude washed over his face. "I would come back as soon as possible," he promised. 2 weeks, 3 at most. "And I'll be here," she assured him. "The ranch won't fall apart in your absence." The next 3 days passed quickly, filled with preparations for his departure. Quentin met with the Parker brothers, giving detailed instructions about ranch operations during his absence. Eleanor prepared provisions for his journey and packed his clothes with care. On the morning of his departure, They stood together in the pre-dawn darkness, beside the wagon that would take him to town. "I've never had someone to come home to before," Quentin said quietly, his breath misting in the cold air. "It's a powerful motivation to return quickly and safely." Eleanor smiled despite the worry gnawing at her. "Then hold that thought close." He drew her into his arms, holding her against his chest as if memorizing the feel of her. "Eleanor," he murmured against her hair, "when I come back, there are things I want to say to you. Important things." She knew what he meant, words they had been approaching gradually over the winter months, feelings that had grown between them despite initial hesitation. "I'll be here to listen," she promised. His kiss was tender yet fervent, a pledge of return rather than goodbye. Then he was climbing into the wagon, the Parker brothers waving farewell as they escorted him to town. Eleanor watched until the wagon disappeared around the bend, then returned to the silent house that already felt emptier without his presence. The first week of Quentin's absence passed slowly. Eleanor threw herself into household tasks, deep cleaning rooms that hadn't received attention since she'd arrived, organizing linens and planning improvements for the spring garden. The Parker brothers were respectful and helpful, checking on her regularly and keeping her informed about ranch operations. In the evenings, Eleanor read from the poetry book Quentin had given her, finding comfort in the elegant, insightful verses. She wore the locket constantly, touching it absently throughout the day as if it connected her to both the man she had lost and the one she hoped would soon return. 10 days after Quentin's departure, a letter arrived from Helena. His handwriting, bold and clear across the envelope, made her heart leap with relief and anticipation. Inside was a brief note explaining that the investigation was progressing, but would take longer than anticipated. He expected to be gone another 2 weeks at minimum. He expressed concern for her well-being and the ranch, but assured her that he thought of her constantly. The letter's tone was proper and somewhat formal, clearly written with awareness that others might read it. Yet, Eleanor could sense the depth of feeling behind the carefully chosen words. She read it multiple times before carefully storing it in her room. As January gave way to February, the weather turned treacherous again. A series of storms swept through the valley, bringing heavy snow and dangerous winds. Eleanor and the Parker brothers maintained the ranch as best they could, breaking ice from water troughs and ensuring livestock had access to feed. One afternoon, as she was preparing dinner, Samuel Parker burst into the kitchen, his face red from cold and exertion. "Mrs. Nash," he gasped, "there's riders coming, 4 of them from the east." Eleanor felt a flutter of hope. "Mr. Xavier," Samuel shook his head, "don't think so, these men don't look friendly." Alarm replaced hope. "Where's Joseph?" "Checking the south fence line, won't be back for hours." Samuel's young face was serious. "I think you should get the shotgun, madam." Eleanor nodded, hurrying to her room where Thomas's old shotgun stood in the corner. She loaded it quickly, her hands steady despite her racing heart, then returned to the kitchen where Samuel waited, his own rifle in hand. "They're almost to the yard," he reported. "I don't recognize any of them." "Let's meet them outside," Eleanor decided. Better than letting them come to the door. They stepped onto the porch just as 4 horsemen entered the yard, their mounts steaming in the cold air. The men were rough-looking, unshaven and trail-worn. The leader, a burly man with a scar running down one cheek, reined his horse to a stop and surveyed the house with calculating eyes. "Afternoon," he called, his gaze fixing on Eleanor. "This the Xavier spread?" "It is," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice steady. "Mr. Xavier isn't here at present." The man's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile. "That's a shame. When do you expect him back?" "Any day now," Eleanor lied. "What business do you have with him?" The leader exchanged glances with his companions. "Old acquaintance." "Thought we'd pay him a visit." His eyes narrowed. "You his wife?" "I'm the housekeeper," Eleanor said firmly. "And this is one of the ranch hands. We're not in the habit of entertaining unexpected visitors. Perhaps you could leave a message for Mr. Xavier in town." The man chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Ain't the message leaving type, madam? Think we'll wait for him here if it's all the same to you." Samuel shifted beside Eleanor, his rifle held casually but ready. "The lady asked you to move on," he said, his young voice remarkably steady. "I suggest you do as she says." For a tense moment, Eleanor thought the men might force the issue. The leader's hand hovered near his holstered pistol, and his companions spread out slightly, creating a wider threat. Then the man shrugged, apparently deciding the confrontation wasn't worth it, at least not yet. "We'll be back when Xavier returns," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a polite social call. "Tell him Marcus Flynn is looking for him. He'll remember." With that, he wheeled his horse around, and the 4 riders departed as quickly as they had arrived, heading toward town. Once they were out of sight, Eleanor released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You did well, Samuel," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Those men mean trouble," the young man replied grimly. "We should send word to Mr. Xavier." Eleanor nodded, her mind racing. "Joseph needs to get to town as soon as he returns. We'll wire Mr. Xavier and Helena." For the rest of the day, Eleanor couldn't shake her unease. The name Marcus Flynn had clearly been meant to convey something significant to Quentin. She suspected it had to do with his past as a lawman, perhaps even connected to the case that had taken him to Helena. When Joseph returned, she explained the situation, and he immediately volunteered to ride to town at first light to send the telegram. "I'll stay close to the house tonight," Samuel assured her as darkness fell. "Won't let those men catch us by surprise if they come back." That night, Eleanor slept poorly, the shotgun propped against her bedside table. Every creak of the house settling in the cold made her start awake, listening for intruders. Morning brought no sign of the strangers, and Joseph set out for town as planned. He returned by mid-afternoon, his expression grave. "I sent the wire," he reported, "but I learned something in town you should know. Those men were asking questions about the ranch and Mr. Xavier, and about you, Mrs. Nash." Eleanor felt a chill. "What kind of questions?" "About your relationship with Mr. Xavier, how long you've been here, whether you're alone when he's gone." Joseph looked uncomfortable. "The bartender at the saloon said they seemed particularly interested in your daily routine." The implication was clear and frightening. These men weren't simply looking for Quentin, they saw Eleanor as leverage. "We need to be prepared," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "They might come back before Mr. Xavier returns or the law can respond." The Parker brothers nodded solemnly. They were young, Joseph only 22 and Samuel 20, but they were capable and loyal. "We'll take turns keeping watch," Joseph decided. "And Mrs. Nash, you shouldn't be alone, even in the house." For the next 2 days, they maintained a vigilant routine. One brother was always with the livestock, while the other stayed near the house. Eleanor kept the shotgun within reach as she went about her chores, watching the road for any sign of riders. On the 3rd day after the stranger's visit, a response came from Helena, not a telegram, but Quentin himself, arriving in a rented buggy he'd driven straight from town. Eleanor ran from the house when she heard the approaching vehicle, relief flooding through her at the sight of him. He barely had time to set the brake before she was at his side, his arms encircling her as he lifted her briefly off her feet. "Are you all right?" he asked urgently, his eyes scanning her face. "Joseph's telegram said Flynn was here." "We're fine," she assured him. "They came, asked for you, then left when we told them you weren't here. But they said they'd be back." Quentin's expression was grim as he looked beyond her to the Parker brothers who had emerged from the barn. "You boys did well, protecting Mrs. Nash and the property." "Weren't nothing, sir," Joseph said, though he stood a bit straighter at the praise. "But those men seemed mighty determined to find you." "I know they are." Quentin's arm remained protectively around Eleanor's waist. "Let's go inside. There are things I need to explain." In the kitchen, over coffee Eleanor prepared with shaking hands, Quentin revealed what she had already suspected Marcus Flynn was connected to his past as a lawman. He's the fugitive I was helping track, Quentin explained, his voice tight. A killer who escaped justice 2 years ago when I was with Pinkertons. He swore revenge on everyone involved in his capture. And now he's found you, Eleanor said quietly. Quentin nodded. The agency had information he was heading to Montana. That's why they contacted me. But I never imagined he'd track me here so quickly. What does he want? Samuel asked. To kill me, Quentin replied bluntly, and hurt anyone close to me in the process. That's his pattern. Eleanor felt cold despite the warm kitchen. What can we do? Alert the sheriff. Sheriff Peters is visiting his sister in Butte, Joseph said. Won't be back for another week at least. Quentin considered this information. Then we prepare to defend ourselves. Flynn won't wait long now that he knows where I am. They spent the rest of the day securing the property, checking weapons, boarding vulnerable windows, creating defensive positions. As darkness fell, Quentin insisted the Parker brothers get some rest while he took first watch. Alone with Eleanor in the kitchen, he finally allowed his composure to crack slightly. I'm so sorry, he said, taking her hands in his. I never meant to bring danger to your door. If anything happened to you because of my past, nothing has happened, she interrupted gently. And nothing will. We're prepared now, he shook his head. Flynn is dangerous, Eleanor, cunning and ruthless. I should get you to town, somewhere safe. This is my home now, she said firmly. Our home, I won't be driven from it by fear. Something flickered in Quentin's eyes at her word's surprise, then a deep warmth. Our home, he repeated softly. I like the sound of that. Eleanor felt a blush rise in her cheeks. I didn't mean to presume. You presumed nothing that I haven't hoped for, he assured her, lifting her hands to his lips. When this is over, there are things I want to ask you, proper things about a future together. Despite the danger hanging over them, Eleanor's heart lightened at his words. Then we'd best ensure there is an after this is over, she said with a small smile. Quentin nodded, his expression turning serious again. Get some rest. I'll wake you if anything happens. Eleanor retired to her room, though she knew sleep would be elusive. She changed into her nightgown and robe, then sat by the window, watching the moonlit yard and thinking of all that had transpired since that day in Cooper's store when Quentin had put down $1 for bread. She must have dozed off eventually, for she woke with a start to the sound of gunfire. Outside her window, figures moved in the pre-dawn light, at least 3 men approaching the barn where she knew Joseph was keeping watch. Grabbing the shotgun, Eleanor hurried to the main room, where she found Quentin at the window, rifle in hand. Flynn and his men, he confirmed without turning. They've pinned Joseph in the barn. Samuel's working his way around to help him. What can I do? Eleanor asked, checking that the shotgun was loaded. Quentin glanced at her, surprise and admiration crossing his face at the sight of her determined stance. Keep watch on the back of the house. They'll try to come at us from multiple directions. She nodded, moving to position herself at the kitchen window. For several long minutes, silence reigned, broken only by an occasional exchange of gunfire from the direction of the barn. Then a shadow moved at the edge of her vision, a man creeping along the side of the house toward the back door. Without hesitation, Eleanor raised the shotgun and fired through the window. The glass shattered, and the man yelled in pain, staggering back, clutching his shoulder. Eleanor. Quentin called from the front room. One tried the back, she reported, already reloading. I winged him. More gunfire erupted from the barn, followed by a triumphant whoop that she recognized as Samuel's voice. One threat contained, at least, but the danger was far from over. The wounded man had retreated, but she could see him conferring with another figure at the edge of the property. They would try again, more carefully this time. The attack came with the rising sun, a coordinated assault from multiple directions. Shots peppered the house, splintering wood and shattering the remaining windows. Eleanor kept low, moving between positions to fire whenever she had a clear shot. In the front room, she heard Quentin exchanging fire with someone on the porch. A man cursed loudly, then there was the sound of breaking wood as the front door gave way. Eleanor, get back, Quentin shouted. She moved toward him, shotgun ready, just as a burly figure burst through the splintered door. It was Flynn, his scarred face contorted with rage and bloodlust. He fired wildly toward Quentin, who dove behind an overturned table. Without hesitation, Eleanor stepped into the room and fired both barrels of the shotgun. The blast caught Flynn in the side, spinning him around and sending his pistol flying from his hand. He crashed into the wall, leaving a smear of blood as he slumped to the floor. For a moment, the house was silent except for Flynn's labored breathing. Then, shots outside announced that the fight wasn't over. 2 more of Flynn's men were still active. Quentin moved to Flynn, kicking his fallen pistol away and checking that he was no longer a threat. "Stay with him," he told Eleanor. "I need to help the boys." She nodded, reloading the shotgun with shaking hands as Quentin slipped out the broken door. Flynn's eyes were open, glaring at her with hatred. "You're a dead woman," he wheezed. "All of you." "Not today," Eleanor replied, keeping the shotgun trained on him. "Not by your hand." Outside, the gunfire intensified, then ceased abruptly. Eleanor held her breath, praying for Quentin's safety. When footsteps approached the porch, she raised the shotgun, only lowering it when Quentin's voice called out. "It's over, Eleanor. We got them." He entered the house, blood streaming from a graze on his arm, but otherwise intact. Behind him came the Parker brothers, Joseph sporting a bandage around his thigh but walking under his own power. "Flynn?" Quentin asked, looking at the wounded man. "Still alive," Eleanor replied, though not for lack of trying on his part. Quentin knelt beside Flynn, checking his injuries. "He'll live long enough to hang," he pronounced grimly. "Joseph, can you ride to the next town? We need the federal marshal." The young man nodded. "I can make it." "Samuel, help me secure these men." "Eleanor," Quentin turned to her, his eyes softening. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look, her nightgown and robe covered in plaster dust and gunpowder residue, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. "You saved my life," Quentin said quietly. "That shot." "I did what was necessary," she replied simply. Then, as reactions set in and her hands began to tremble, she added, "Though I think I need to sit down." The aftermath of the gunfight was a blur of activity. Joseph rode for help while Quentin and Samuel secured the surviving attackers, Flynn and 1 other man. The 3rd member of Flynn's gang had died in the exchange of fire near the barn. By mid-afternoon, the federal marshal had arrived with deputies, taking custody of the prisoners and recording statements from everyone involved. The official was clearly impressed by Eleanor's role in the defense. "Not many women would have kept their heads in such circumstances, Mrs. Nash," he remarked as he prepared to depart with the prisoners. "Few women have as much worth fighting for," she replied, her eyes meeting Quentin's across the room. When the lawmen had gone, taking the grim procession with them, a strange quiet settled over the ranch. The Parker brothers set about boarding up broken windows and sweeping away glass, while Eleanor prepared a meal for everyone, finding comfort in the ordinary task. That evening, with temporary repairs made and wounds tended, the 4 of them sat around the kitchen table, exhausted but alive. Joseph's leg had been properly bandaged by the marshal's deputy, who had some medical training, and Quentin's arm was cleaned and wrapped. "Never thought I'd be in a proper gunfight," Samuel remarked, a hint of youthful excitement breaking through his fatigue. "Like something from a dime novel." "It's less exciting when you're living it," Quentin replied dryly. "But you boys did well. I couldn't have asked for better hands." The brothers beamed at the praise, their pride evident despite their attempts at nonchalance. "Think we'll turn in early," Joseph said, rising carefully to avoid putting weight on his injured leg. "Been a long day." After they had gone, Quentin and Eleanor remained at the table, the lantern between them casting soft shadows across their faces. For a long moment, neither spoke, the events of the day settling around them like dust after a storm. "I never wanted this for you," Quentin said finally. "Any of it." Eleanor reached across the table, taking his hand. "Yet here we are, alive and together. That's what matters." He studied her face, wonder in his eyes. "You're remarkable, Eleanor Nash. Do you know that? Most women would be halfway to the next town by now after what you've been through." "I'm not most women," she replied with a small smile. "And I've already lost one home. I'm not inclined to abandon another so easily." Quentin's fingers tightened around hers. "You called it our home earlier." "I did." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Is that presumptuous of me?" "No," he said softly. "It's everything I've hoped for since the day I met you." He hesitated, then continued. "I had planned a more proper setting for this conversation, perhaps dinner in town or a ride through the spring meadows, not sitting in a shot-up kitchen after a gunfight." Eleanor laughed despite herself. "Proper has never been our strong suit, has it?" "No, I suppose not." Quentin smiled, then grew serious again. "Eleanor, I love you. I think I've loved you since I saw you standing in Cooper's store, too proud to beg but desperate enough to trade your wedding ring for bread." The simple declaration made her heart swell. "And I love you," she replied, the words feeling right and true. "Though I fought against it, feeling it was too soon after Thomas, too complicated given our circumstances." "And now?" Quentin asked, hope evident in his voice. "Now I know that life is too uncertain and too precious to deny what's in my heart." She squeezed his hand. "I love you, Quentin Xavier. And I want to build a life with you here if you'll have me." His smile was radiant. "I'll have you, Eleanor Nash, as my wife if you're willing." "I am," she said without hesitation, "very willing indeed." Quentin rose from his chair, coming around the table to kneel beside her despite his injured arm. "Then marry me. Not someday, not when it's proper, but soon. I've wasted too much of my life already, and I don't want to waste another day without you as my wife." Eleanor cradled his face in her hands, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment from desperate widow to beloved partner, from trading a wedding ring for bread to the promise of a new wedding band and a shared future. "Yes," she whispered, leaning down to seal the promise with a kiss. "As soon as you like." Spring came to the valley in a rush of green and gold, the land awakening from winter's grip with renewed vigor. The ranch, too, seemed to bloom with possibility as repairs from the gunfight were completed and new improvements begun. Eleanor and Quentin were married in late April, a small ceremony in the newly built Silver Creek Church with the Parker brothers as witnesses and a handful of townspeople in attendance. The gossip about their relationship had gradually transformed into something approaching acceptance, especially after the story of their stand against Flynn and his gang had circulated. Eleanor wore a simple dress of pale blue, with wildflowers in her hair and Thomas's locket around her neck, a remembrance of the past carried into a hopeful future. Quentin, handsome in a new suit, looked at her with such love that she felt beautiful despite the simplicity of her attire. The minister spoke of new beginnings and God's grace, words that resonated deeply with both of them. When it came time to exchange rings, Quentin placed a simple gold band on Eleanor's finger, similar to the one she had nearly traded away months before, yet symbolizing something entirely different. "With this ring I thee wed," he said, his voice steady and sure. "And I promise to cherish you all the days of my life." As they drove back to the ranch, their home as husband and wife, Eleanor leaned against Quentin's shoulder, contentment washing over her like the warm spring sunshine. "Happy?" he asked, his arms secure around her waist. "Completely," she replied, and meant it. Life settled into new patterns as spring gave way to summer. The ranch thrived under their combined care, Quentin's practical knowledge and Eleanor's organizational skills, forming a partnership that extended beyond their personal relationship. The Parker brothers stayed on, joined by 2 more hands as the cattle herd expanded. Eleanor's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables for the ranch and preserves for the coming winter. The house, once neglected and empty, now rang with conversation and occasional laughter. On warm evenings, Quentin would play the gramophone on the porch while Eleanor sat beside him, their hands intertwined as they watched the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Sometimes they spoke of the future of children they hoped for, of improvements to the ranch, of the community they were gradually becoming part of as Silver Creek slowly recovered from the mine's closure. Other times they spoke of the past Quentin, sharing more of his experiences as a lawman. Eleanor reminiscing about her childhood in Ohio or her early days with Thomas. There was no jealousy or discomfort in these conversations. Both understood that past loves and losses had shaped them into the people they were now, people capable of finding joy again after sorrow. In September, almost exactly a year after their first meeting, Eleanor and Quentin sat on their porch watching the autumn sun set over the valley. Her head rested against his shoulder, her hand on the gentle swell of her stomach where their first child grew. "I was thinking," Quentin said, his fingers playing with a strand of her hair, "about that day in Cooper's store." "MMM," Eleanor murmured, content and drowsy in the evening warmth. "If you hadn't been there at that exact moment, trying to trade your ring for bread. If I'd arrived 5 minutes later or decided to go to the saloon first instead of the store." He shook his head. "Our whole lives would be different." Eleanor considered this. "Do you believe in fate, Quentin?" "I'm not sure," he admitted. "But I do believe in making the most of the chances we're given, whatever brings them our way. Then let's be thankful for whatever force fate, God, or simple coincidence brought us together that day." She lifted her face to his. "And let's make the most of every day we have." His kiss was tender and familiar, yet still held the power to make her heart race. "I plan to," he promised, "for all the days we have left." As twilight deepened around them, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the desperate woman who had tried to trade her wedding ring for bread, and the cowboy who had put $1 down and walked her home. From that simple act of kindness had grown a love neither had expected, but both now cherished beyond measure. Their story, she knew, was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, joys and sorrows to navigate together. But sitting there in the gathering darkness, secure in Quentin's embrace with their child growing beneath her heart, Eleanor Nash Xavier felt something she had once thought lost forever: the certainty of belonging, of being truly home.